All right, everybody, we're at the top of the hour, 1 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started right away. I know we've got a bunch of people kind of entering the room as we speak. And so we're just really excited to have everybody yet again for what I think should be a lot of fun, should be a great roundtable, and hoping that you're able to learn a lot. This month, this August webinar is called From Applied to Hired, Navigating the Technician Journey. We have three fantastic panelists that you'll get to meet here in just a second. But before we do that, I did want to go through some housekeeping notes and some housekeeping items. Just so you know, we've muted all of your microphones. That's kind of part of the webinar setting. But if you do have a chat, please feel free to use the chat box, interact with other attendees. We always say this, and it always goes over well, is in the chat, let us know where you're joining us from, your name, the company you represent. It's always a lot of fun to kind of see where everybody is joining us from. And then lastly, we will send a link to the recording to everybody that registered. But those people that registered and aren't live, they miss out on all the comments and all the fun stuff. So thank you for all of you that are able to join us live. A couple other housekeeping items. If you do want to talk with the other attendees, please use the chat function on the left-hand side. There are so many best practices and good conversation that happen in those chats each month. And I think there's so much to be learned from the others that are also attending the webinar. So please use that and talk with each other, and let's try to help make this industry a better place. If you do have a question for the panelists, you can use the Q&A button down below. Oftentimes those two get confused, but the more you can use that Q&A button, the more it really stays visible to us. During the course of the webinar, it might take a little bit longer to get your question answered. We'll do our best to get to it as soon as we can. If it's relevant to the topic at hand, we'll try to get to it right away. But there are going to be some that we hold to the end of the webinar. Again, all sessions are being recorded and will be emailed out to the registrants after the event. All right, as an introduction, quick plug to WrenchWay. Most of you probably know who we are. Our mission is to promote and improve careers in the automotive and diesel industry, and really creating that community around talking and discussing and really working together to make this a better place to be for our technicians, for our shops, for everybody involved. We do have about 1,000 shops and dealerships on the platform, 600 schools. If any of you have relationships with high schools or post-secondary tech schools, please refer them to us here at WrenchWay. We've done so many cool things with the schools over the course of this year, something that we look to really drive forward in helping these programs, making sure that they stay sustainable, stay strong, get us more people into the industry, and the more we can get involved with them, the better. We also have 10,000 registered individual accounts and so much other stuff going on. If you go out to wrenchway.com, you can check out what we're doing with our WrenchWay local events. There'll be more information coming about Techmission National event happening this fall, and just a lot of great resources out there. So with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to turn their cameras on. And there they are. They're coming on right now. I want to get started with just a quick intro. So every day we hear from shops around the country about the challenges you face in hiring quality talent. Between the ghosting, rejected job offers, and the frustration of having a tech use your offer to leverage themselves for a raise at their current employer, there are obstacles everywhere you turn in the hiring journey. So many things out of our control that it can truly drive you crazy. So rather than look at the things that are out of our control, we're going to dive into ways to get better at the things we actually have control of. The focus of today's webinar isn't as much about attracting techs as it is about executing once you have their attention. So joining me today to discuss are Stephanie Glaus, Sarah Boyette, and Tara Topol. Thank you for joining us today, ladies. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Well,
hey guys.
great.
All right, well, let's get to know you a little bit before we really get things kicked off here. So why don't we start with some introductions? Tara, would you mind kicking us off, since this is not your first time around?
Not my first rodeo. Yes, thank
Not
you,
your first
Jay.
rodeo.
No, thank you for having me today and to be able to talk along with Stephanie and Sarah. My name is Tara Topol. I am co-owner of Topol's Service Center in Lake Mills, Wisconsin. We're a small town about halfway between Madison and Milwaukee, and we are celebrating our 75th year. Anniversary this year. We'll be having a big celebration in September to do that, and we're looking forward to it. And I have been in the industry for just over 25 years, working with all the ins and the outs. I basically don't fix the cars and I don't tow the cars. Other than that, I wear the hats. So, yeah, excited to be here today.
Can you tell us what you're doing to celebrate your 75th anniversary? I thought it was very unique, very fun.
Okay, sure. Yes. So my husband actually enjoys brewing beer in his spare time, which he doesn't have much of. But we are having an Octopel Fest party celebration. So instead of Oktoberfest, it's Octopel Fest. Yes.
Very Wisconsin. That is Tara's not too far from our headquarters here in Mount Horeb. So always a pleasure to have Tara join us. Another Wisconsinite we've got, Stephanie. Would you mind giving us a little bit of information about you?
Yeah, so I am Stephanie Glaus. I work at Komro Sales and Service. I work in the Human Resources Department. I'm actually the only one in HR. So Komro Sales and Service, we are a privately owned company, and we primarily serve the dairy agriculture industry. We've been here since 1960. Basically, kind of a nutshell, what we do is we work with customers with facility designs and constructing the services. We also do irrigation, grain handling, manure handling. We construct the high manure, high tech manure separation systems, along with skid steer equipment and sales. So
It is funny to see kind of all of my background come together. I was a rep before Stephanie and her family were Bobcat dealers, but I was a rep for Bobcat, covered that area, covered the dealership in the area at the time. Fun to bring that along. I say it every month, but I think the beauty in these webinars is that we get so many different unique perspectives because it's not just one sector of our industry or one type of shop or dealership in our industry. It's kind of bringing perspective from everybody. So one of my favorite things about doing these roundtables. And last but certainly not least, Sarah Boyette, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Let's learn a little bit more about you.
Great. I am the hiring and compliance coordinator here at Durango Motor Company in Durango, Colorado. We are a Ford, Lincoln, Toyota, and Kia dealer. Roughly about 185 of us within the dealership here. And I have been in this seat at the dealership for about 2 years now, and we are celebrating 11 years of Durango Motor Company actually on Friday.
For those of us not familiar with Colorado geography, can you explain where Durango is at?
Sure. So we are actually in the Four Corners area. We are southwest. We have lots of people that commute up from Farmington, New Mexico, and Aztec, even some Arizona, a few here and there. So we're pretty close to the Four Corners.
Very, very cool. A pleasure to have the three of you here today. As I mentioned before, I'm a really big fan of everything that the three of you do in industry, and it's what made me really, really excited about having this month's webinar, including the three of you, because I do think it's a really hot topic. I hit on it at the top that we work so hard to attract these technicians and attract good quality talent into our shops, yet there's oftentimes opportunities for us to get better in trying to onboard and trying to really honestly not drop the ball on these technicians. We work so hard to get in front of them. We just can't afford to drop the ball. So let's start with dropping the ball. And Stephanie, I want to start with you and talk a little bit about maybe what you see in ways that the shops drop the ball in that initial communication and really in that process where we're trying to hire and add to our team?
yeah, I would say our biggest problem is the lack of time that we have between everything in the shop that has to get completed. And when I send them a resume from Indeed, I mean, it takes time to be able to review it and get back to me. Yes, I want to interview them, and then trying to get a hold of them, and trying to schedule that first phone interview, waiting a couple days to hear back from them, finally getting that interview done. And then trying to get them in the door, do an in-person interview. And sometimes we have to do 2 interviews. So just, I think sometimes we drop the ball when it takes so long from the phone interview to the in-person to the next one that they already have another job offer somewhere else. And a lot of people want that quick gratification, and they want to apply and have a job the next day. And sometimes it just takes time. We have 2 different locations for our Bobcat, so it definitely takes time, and one shop's an hour away, so I can't get there every day. So I would definitely say between the communication and trying to get them in as quickly as we can.
It's a challenge with putting out your daily fires and all of the things that go into your typical day-to-day operation, that it can easily get put to the side, and 2-3 hours go by, 2-3 days go by without that applicant hearing from you. And I think there's a lot of people that are listening to this right now that probably empathize with what you're going through, or sympathize with what you're going through, because I think we've all been there. Sarah, I'm curious, do you see anything similar in your day-to-day operations?
Very, very similar. I would say that part of mine is like that communication, and sometimes it's both ways. Maybe I don't get back to them, within a short period of time, or they don't get back with me. I may reach out. They've reached out, and initially I reach out to set up, like a phone conference, and then don't hear from them for days. And things. And that can be kind of frustrating too, because you don't know, maybe they're just busy, or maybe now they've taken a different job, and trying to decide what to pursue and how to pursue it, and all of those things. I will say that technicians applying, is one of our big, huge priorities. And usually my service and director, fixed ops director over there, they're on top of it, because they can see when people apply as well. So they're following up, asking me, have you talked to them yet?
The process in which you get back with a candidate is huge, and having multiple people involved can be really helpful, but it can also be confusing if you don't have a structure to that process, right? And being able to know that one of you is going to get back to that candidate as fast as humanly possible, it's hard, because you don't know. And if we're not doing well on our communication on the backside and making sure that one another know what happened, and yes, hey, I did reach out to this candidate, it can cause some confusion, not only for you internally, but for that candidate that's out there. Tara, anything that you would add there? And I know we've had several conversations about the challenges of keeping this front and center, and it is hard, isn't it?
Yes, just going back to, I think some places have their people that's all that they do, but a lot of us shops, we are HR and we are accounting, and to be able to, like they said, like both Stephanie and Sarah said, as far as getting back to people, making it a priority, I would just add that, actually defining specifically what we're looking for, and knowing that ahead of time, and making sure that they have those qualities, making sure we have a good ad out there, and making sure that it's going to align with whatever our culture is, and whatever is going to work best for them and for us as well.
I think that's a really important topic, because if time is a real struggle for us, which I think for most of us it is, making sure that we've got some boundaries in place so that we know whether we want to talk to an applicant or not, right? Because there are times where maybe that person isn't going to be a fit for us right off the bat, and maybe it's a skill set thing. I'm still a big believer in taking the time to talk to everybody that you can, because there's so many opportunities where, especially with technicians, they might not give you all of the details that you need about them, right? Where maybe they're leaving some things out, or and they're not overly good at explaining what their experience is. How do you, Tara, I'm going to start right back with you again. How do you dictate, or how do you decide who you're actually going to reach out to?
Honestly, I try to reach out to everybody. I don't really believe in the I think resumes are important, but I don't think they're the end all be all. Most people don't even write their own resumes, or they use an application to be able to do that. So I really just, especially in today's day and the huge technician shortage, I really try to reach out to all of them, to be honest with you.
Stephanie, same thing with you?
Yeah, that's a tough one because there's times I look at a resume and I'm like, oh, I don't think I want to reach out to this person. And then for some reason I will schedule, I'll just like, why not? So I'll give them a call and they turn out to actually have way more experience and skills than they show on their resume. So sometimes, like Tara was saying, you just got to give it a shot and I mean, at least do a phone interview.
I will say an application or a resume is one of the more awkward things to create because you're trying to maybe brag on yourself, but you also don't want to overemphasize a skill, and it's clunky a lot of times. You're going out and trying to find a Word template or a Google template of some type to write up a resume, and it feels, I don't know, it feels weird. Like I know back when I was filling out applications, that was always kind of a challenging thing for me. Sarah, are there maybe pieces of advice that you might have for somebody reviewing a resume and kind of understanding what their background is and maybe if it would be a fit for your organization?
Sure. I generally, with us being specific brands and those, but we of course need other technicians as well for Tire or Express. So it kind of depends on what I'm looking for. But if I'm looking for someone in the mainline shop, of course I'm going to look and see where they worked, if they worked for a Ford dealership or specifically or a Toyota dealership. And hoping that they've listed their certifications that they may actually have. And if not, and they've worked at one of those dealerships, it's worth a conversation. I've gotten to where I feel like looking at a resume now, like most of us have just mentioned, that people don't do a great job at promoting themselves on paper, and looking at it in the old fashioned way. If you can say, okay, they did this, but they didn't stay there very long. Well, I wonder why. And then just being able to dismiss it for different reasons. I've gotten to where I try to keep an open mind, look at it enough to where I have enough to talk to them and ask questions about, and also give them an opportunity to explain more. Maybe they didn't stay at XYZ dealership, but for 6 months, but why? And then they say, well, we moved, life happened. It wasn't necessarily the job or anything like that. It's life happened to me and I had to move. Well, that makes total sense nowadays. So
I think
it's worth the conversation. For me, I reach out to every applicant we have, no matter the position.
And I think that question that you just posed there is so important, is why did this happen? And I think so many of us that have interviewed people over the years find that there's so much that comes out of that, right? There's so much information that comes out of that question. Excuse me, I went down the wrong pipe there. All right, so we work to get these applicants and we're trying to get them in the door. How do we then walk through that process? So there's two different avenues here, right? There's the avenue that they apply and you don't hear from them, right? You're trying to reach out to them. You can't seem to get a hold of them. There's the other one where they do respond and you are having a conversation. So I almost feel like we have to go two different avenues here. Sarah, talk to me a little bit about when they're not responding. Any best practices of what we should be doing if they're not actually responding once they applied. And it still blows my mind a lot of times that people go out of their way to apply to the job and then don't respond once you actually go back and talk to them. So any advice there, Sarah?
I generally just kind of have made it a best practice of my own that if they did take the time to apply, they did that for some reason. So if I reach out on my initial call or email or text message or however they've agreed to let me communicate with them and I don't hear back from them, I usually give it a day or so. And then if I don't, I follow up with the second one in some way. Just, maybe I'm just following up with your application, would really like to visit with you. When would be a great time? And then sometimes I even try to call someone. It just kind of depends on where we're at and what their skill set is. And, if it's someone that's got, senior level type qualifications or something, and they've taken the time to apply, I'm going to definitely do my due diligence to try to reach out to them in every avenue possible. And then if I still don't hear from them, then just know that maybe they changed their mind, life happened to them in some way, shape, or form, and they're no longer currently interested in the position. which is very discouraging sometimes, especially when you see their resume and you're like, yes, this is a promising candidate, but it happens.
Stephanie, that's never happened to you, has it?
I wish I could say it's never happened, but it definitely has. And basically exactly what Sarah was talking about. I start out with, I usually will send them a quick email, try to schedule a phone interview. That way I'm not calling them while they're working. I try to get the best time to be able to reach them through them. And then if that doesn't work, then I'll give them a call. I mean, I've even done a few times where I've texted them. I was like, hey, it's Stephanie from Komro. Just wondering. A lot of times I've actually had a lot more replies back to a text message than a phone call and stuff, so that's been very helpful. But yeah, every once in a while you want those awesome resumes, and then for some reason they ghost you.
I know Lisa Joseph from our team is as one of the attendees here today. One of her best pieces of advice is to use a 3-3-3 method, which is call, text, email 3 times and see if you can invoke a response one of those 3 different ways, right? And I think the more you can spread the net and really try to engage with them, the better. My piece of advice there would be to try and make it a little personal too, right? Personalize the message a little bit. Don't make it sound so canned. And we see this on reverse job posting with WrenchWay a lot, with some of the messaging that goes back and forth, that it can seem almost robotic. And maybe that happens over the years when you've looked at 1,000 different resumes and have reached out to a lot of people. But the more you can kind of put yourself in the other person's shoes and read that message and kind of look at it and say, all right, this does sound robotic. I should probably change this up a little bit. And I think that's even going to get worse with the AI tools that are coming, right? And it sounds crazy because everybody says, okay, you put an input into AI and it's going to spit out a response for you. But I think there's a huge risk there in sounding the same over and over and over again. And so the more that we can put a custom touch or a personalization in that message, I think the better. Tara, any additional advice that you would offer for that initial touch point and maybe when you're not getting a response from a candidate?
I don't think so. I honestly try not to overcomplicate it. I mean, I really don't like to have to chase after anybody, to be honest with you. If it's going to work, it's going to work. And if not, then that's okay too. Maybe somebody's just having a bad day and, was getting emotional or whatever it might be. So, yeah.
I think it's easy to just go out and beat your head against the wall, quite literally in this case, when somebody applies and they don't respond. But I do think that's good advice. Stay even keeled in your head. Don't get frustrated by it. Don't look into it or overlook into it and thinking that was a reflection of your business. But really just try to drive that communication and that conversation. Now, the other side of this, and this is where I think when I started off, we talked about being able to control the things we can control, right? Really have structure around that. And one of those opportunities that I think a lot of shops drop the ball on is with that initial application, the communication, how fast we follow up to that, but just general structure around that process, I think is missing in a lot of businesses in this industry. So I want to ask for advice on that process, what we can do better to not drop the ball. If we do have that candidate that applies, that is genuinely interested in coming to work for us, what are some things that we can do to make sure that we come off across as professional and that we come off as a shop that, would be a great place to work at? And I'm going to open this up to the table here and see who wants to take that question. But I am interested to maybe dive into this a little bit because I do think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement with everybody listening here today. Do we have anybody eager to answer that? Sarah, you look like you want to talk. I can tell a little bit there.
Well, I was like, contemplating with myself. We're lucky enough that is one of my main priorities is hiring. So I am the person that looks at resumes, and, once people have applied and goes through their application, reaches out, does those phone screens, and then moves them through that process. I have kind of, and that this is going to sound maybe a little silly, but I kind of made a challenge or a priority with myself that I'm going to reach out to that person the day that they apply, period. You know, I also, I mean, with the system we use and those kinds of things that we're using in order to do all of our application process, that is something that is doable. Sometimes it's not as it's a little more rushed, let me say that, than others, but depending upon positions and, you know, and those type of things, just kind of depends upon the detail that I go into as far as the time I spend looking and, you know, resume looking and those kinds of things. But and then I get a report every month of how quickly I did those things. And it's kind of like I said, a challenge with myself to make sure I'm staying within that. One, because the pool of people in our area can be limited, you know, especially with either technicians, but all positions. So when people are taking the time to apply, I'm trying to make sure I get back with them in a very quick amount of time, because I know they've applied to, you know, a handful, if not 16 to 20 other positions. And if there's somebody that I feel like is going to be a great asset to Durango Motor Company, I want to make sure that I'm kind of at the top of their list.
What a great best practice right there. Respond by the end of the day. I think that's as important as, you know, growing up in a shop, it was a sin if the phone rang more than twice, right? And if it did, somebody was in trouble. And I think we have to take that same approach, and we have to be that urgent with this to really have that best practice in mind. And there's going to be times where you could easily say, hey, we need to respond within 15 minutes of them applying. But I don't think that's realistic, right? Because we all get in meetings, we all have our regular day-to-day activities. But I do think it's worth noting that should be implemented at every shop. You apply, if somebody applies with you, you get back to them as soon as humanly possible. At the very worst, it's by the end of the day. Stephanie, does that sound like an okay thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely wonderful. It's awesome that Sarah has the ability or does that. I mean, I know there's days where I just physically cannot respond to them by the end of the day, but for sure by the end of the next day, I will definitely, even if it's just a quick email I can send to them, just even know, like, so they know that I recognize, I received their resume and that I want to speak with them. So at least they know there's some kind of movement going on, even if it's not a direct phone call. But no, it's definitely a great practice to have.
And that hasn't always been my practice, Stephanie. It's something I kind of grew into, you know what I mean? Like, and have just kind of somewhat made it part of my day-to-day kind of responsibility, if you will. It didn't always go that way. But now, like I said, it's kind of a personal accountability challenge kind of thing that I've set for myself. You know, and if I was the other person on the other line, even with all the other things I've got going on, if I was the applicant, you know, how would I want to be treated?
I think a nice practice there to add on to that, and I've heard from several of our clients that do this, is that they have, you know, I live by my calendar. So if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't get done. If you can add a task at the end of your day that the very last thing you do is check for applicants, and be able to make that a repeatable process each and every day, the fact that you're doing that, one, pays attention to the hiring process maybe the way you should. And hey, there's an applicant that came in, I need to get back to them. But adding that as a calendar reminder and almost like a cap to the end of your day, I think we all have some routines of some types. And if you can add that to your routine, I think that is even better. Now, Tara, there's going to be days whether you're maybe not even in the office or so busy that you can't get your head above water. Is there a way to maybe pivot to somebody else to respond, right? So if we're not in the office or we don't have immediate access to these applications, to have somebody keep an eye on it and see that to make sure that they're being responded to by the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think honestly, I'm not there yet. Hopefully, I'm sure that there's somebody within the office that would be able to help with that now as we grow. I would just to answer the question that you had asked, mine's just within 24 hours. So before you leave at the end of the day is awesome. Kind of getting closer to Stephanie is within that time, and then yeah, and I guess that's just being smaller and independent. I get to be part of that and have the say. So.
By the way, there is no shame in being honest and transparent about this because we're all here to learn. And I think as much as we all want to be perfect and say it's going to go perfect every single time, the reality is it's probably not true. But I also think that is where a strong process holds up. If you've got a process and you've got that best practice of not going home until you respond to that applicant, and if you're not there, here's the process. What happens when Tara's not at the shop? We're going to go to this next person, and they know that's a part of their job responsibility. You can't just assume that they're going to know. You have to work that out and communicate that. So somebody is talking back and forth. So I do think when we talk about process, there's so many things that can, we can roll our eyes and say, yeah, it's not realistic for our operation, or it's not, we're all different size companies. But this is the number one need in our industry, in the whole industry, the diesel, the automotive, the collision, anybody. It is the number one priority, or it should be, in terms of what we're doing, because our jobs are to build our teams and build really, really good teams. But if we don't prioritize it where it needs to be, we struggle with that. And that's still something, when we say 24 hours, there are so many shops out there that still aren't responding within a week, 2 weeks, and wondering why they can't find people. If you're waiting that long, I'm sorry, you're gone. Like you're not getting that person. That person's found a job, or elected to stay where they're at, which I think is happening more and more. That brings me to maybe my next point, which is, I think I again said at the intro, the frustration in a technician leveraging your offer to go back to their current place of employment and get a higher salary and get a raise. I think technicians are really, really smart people, right? They know they've got a feel for the industry. They've got a feel for the desperation. I think, remember growing up around a farm and my grandpa saying that maybe that horse or that cow could tell that you're nervous, or they can sense it in you. And I think it's the same thing here. A lot of us shops reek of desperation when we're reaching out to these folks. When we can calm that down a little bit, and then we have the ability to communicate with them. I think when you get into this situation where a technician is leveraging you, I don't think it's uncommon. I'm curious, maybe I'll take a step back. Do you feel like this has ever happened to the three of you?
I'm 95% sure that this has happened. Of course, that particular applicant didn't come out and, and say that, but of course they didn't also become an employee of ours either, so I mean, it just kind of is, especially in the employee type, kind of driven type job market that we're in, especially with technicians and the lack of, and they know that they're needed. It happens. But I can say it happens probably less to me, or has in the past, than probably to some. But you just kind of, for whatever reason, that particular employee may not have been the best fit, and you just kind of have to look at it in a different way. Is if they're doing that and they weren't maybe serious in the long run about becoming, an employee with us and things, then it could be something that worked out in the way that it did for both people.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not a bad thing, right? And that's where we've had some different WrenchWay polls over the years that have talked about this. We had one about ghosting and why a technician ghosts. It's fun to have those conversations because a lot of times they don't happen. Those conversations won't happen because who are they going to talk about ghosting to? Their current employer, their new employer. But we had a poll question out there once that asked, have you ghosted? And the percentage of techs that had ghosted was really, really high. The reasoning why they ghosted was very interesting, because it was anything from the shop maybe oversold how nice of a shop it is over the phone, and then when they got there, they're like, not for me. Maybe they had heard something in the meantime about the manager. There's a variety of different reasons why they ghost, and I think this is an element to that, because I do think there's the opportunity for that technician that's out there to get an easy raise, especially if they're a really good technician. Most shops are taking really, really good care of their good technicians now. And so it's not as easy to find that disgruntled A-level technician, right? So I think maybe pivoting the conversation to the ghosting side makes a little bit more sense here. And maybe I want to walk through a scenario that I think most of you have probably been in, where tech applies, talk to them on the phone, phone screen goes great. You go to set up the interview, person doesn't show up for the interview. You try to call them, you don't get an answer. You try to text them, you don't get an answer. And I think it's very frustrating, because it's the ups and downs of our business. You're like, all right, we got a great technician here, but then all of a sudden that technician doesn't show up. Tara, is this something, I see you shaking your head, that you've experienced? Walk me through the frustration and maybe some of the reasons. I don't know if you've ever heard a reason why a technician has ghosted you.
Yeah, I honestly don't know either. It hasn't, fortunately, it doesn't happen a lot. I mean, both with communication and with, setting up meetings. But yeah, I'll never be able to understand it. I don't even try to understand it. Obviously, that wasn't the right person to begin with. So I just feel like they just did me a favor, because I'd way rather have it happen at that point than to have them come in and not show up for the first day of work, or show up for a week and then never see them again. And, there's all kinds of horror stories that I hear from other shop owners. And so, yeah, I mean, everybody's on their own path, man. Like, if it doesn't work, you'd think that communication would be important. But it probably isn't to everybody. So just have to take it for what it is.
Stephanie, is there any chance that some of this happens because it's a new setting, it's a big change in their life, if they are serious about making that shift and that change, that, I think there's a lot of folks that get very nervous in social settings, and that when they come to interview with you, it's not the most comfortable thing in the world, right? For both the interviewer and the interviewee, it creates kind of this awkwardness. Do you get any sense that maybe there's some social aspect to this, to where maybe somebody would ghost because of that?
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of people who are so afraid of change, and they, like somebody was mentioning earlier, they may have had a bad day at work, and they're like, I'm done at this place, I'm gonna start applying for jobs. But then when they actually get called and comes down to it, they're like, oh, maybe I really don't want to do this change. Maybe I really don't want to do this interview. And I mean, I've been doing HR for 5 years, and I still get nervous for interviews, and I'm not even the one getting interviewed. So it's uncomfortable for both sides. I hope people know that. So I always try to make sure it's comfortable for people when I'm interviewing them. But I think a lot of people are terrified of change and terrified of new settings and meeting new people. I mean, your first day of work is always so terrifying, and you don't know who to talk to or what to do. And so I think people, when they're leading up to that, get really nervous that they'd rather just stay at their job that they're unhappy at than do that awkward confrontation.
Boy, is that a great point. I think you are spot on. I think there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of technicians that probably don't feel comfortable in that scenario. And again, I hate to point back to process, but the more we can talk about that hiring journey and anything from the interview to, let's talk about that interview part, because what can we do to make that interview less awkward? And that first week of work less awkward. I think we've all been at a first week of work, and it sucks. Like, it is not fun. You don't know anybody. You feel weird asking any question. I know, especially when I was younger, when you come into an organization and you're working, there's just a lot of awkwardness. And I think we've maybe got to look at ways to make it more personal. I talked about personalizing messages in the recruiting process. But once they're in the doors and you're actually talking to them, how do we make it a little bit more fun? And Sarah, I'll go to you in talking about this, because I do think it's an important thing. How do we make it a little bit more comfortable for that technician to come in and sit down and have a conversation with you?
I try to, of course, make conversation with them when they first come in. I've already done a phone screen, so I've been able to visit with them and know maybe a little bit of where they're at or what they're looking for, and just different things based off of that phone conversation, and try to just be a little personable about that. As far as also, we have certain steps that we do. We have some assessments and different things for all of our positions. So there's a certain process that we use, and I also make sure that they know before whoever is coming in to do the interview. I facilitate that interview, but very rarely actually sit in on the in-person interviews. So we always have two managers that sit in, and I make sure that applicant or candidate knows who's going to be coming in before they come in, and kind of what their position is here. And I ask them, a lot, if they have questions up to a certain point at different times during the process. Make sure that, that do you need any water? Do you, those kinds of things, because, people that are nervous, you have a dry throat, or just different things, depending upon the person and things. But I try to keep all of that as consistent as possible. And it usually takes 20 to 30 minutes before the actual people come in, whoever is actually the manager is interviewing. So I have that little bit of interaction with them as well.
I always liked starting off with like a joke or something like that, but apparently I'm just awful at telling jokes. So then it just always ended up in this really awkward silence where the person wasn't laughing, and I felt really bad about myself. So I tried to stay away from that. I did want to call attention to a comment that I saw out there, and thank you so much for everybody that is commenting out there and adding to this conversation. So much good information out there. But Carrie Martin said it goes both ways, right? And I think as Carrie wrote this, we were talking about that technician leveraging their job offer to get more money. Carrie says, we focus on retention just as much as recruitment, so many of us have to counteroffer just to retain the teammate from going to the competition. And I think this is such a struggle right now for our industry, because there are so many shops that want to stay on top of this, but salaries are changing, it feels like, by the minute. It just keeps changing. The target keeps changing, and it's so hard to stay on top of. So I appreciate Carrie's message there and their thoughts there, because it's so true. It's such a fluid thing right now, and trying to keep your eye on the ball and try to understand where a competitive salary even is can change. And it can change with one employer raising their technicians' wages by $5 an hour or $10 an hour. That upsets the market and changes everything. Any thoughts on how you stay on top of this? I think I'm a big proponent of just cruising Indeed consistently and looking at what everybody else is paying, or maybe checking out a competitor's website. And it's not to even like poach their people. It's more just to make sure that you're taking care of your people in a way that they're not going to leave and go down the road. I'll open this one up to the group as well, and anybody can talk about that one, because I think it's a frustrating thing, and I'm not sure that anybody's really got the answer. Stephanie, you unmuted there.
I know pay is such a big, everybody has to have a paycheck, but I also try to believe or hope that employees are not only just looking for a paycheck, but they're also looking for a great atmosphere, a great company. And I always try to know all of everybody on a personal level and get to know them. We have company picnics and the Christmas parties, and at these picnics we give away drawings and money and prizes and all this fun stuff. So we also have profit sharing twice a year. So I try to reiterate that, because it's a big chunk of money that they're going to be getting twice a year. So I always try to keep saying that, just because your pay may not be there, but all these other benefits it's outweighing than just me giving you more money, type of thing. And typically once I start talking about that stuff, especially profit sharing, they start to turn their mind around. They're like, all right.
Well, and another great point, Stephanie, typically if they're looking for more money, something else may have driven that, right? And maybe they're not happy with something else in the shop. They start to get wandering eyes a little bit and see what else is out there. start thinking about how the grass is greener in a different shop, and maybe that starts, the mind is a really, really funny thing, and once you let it get out of control, and you can't blame a technician, because I think we've all been there, where you start to see other things out there, and maybe it does look a little better than what you're offering. I think that's a great point. I also think it's a great point that you need to reemphasize the things that make you great, right? And the things that make you a really good place to be. So I appreciate that comment. I do want to take that the next step, which is one of my major concerns. And Tara, you and I have had multiple conversations about this, but one of the areas that I think we could improve on as an industry and would help with retention, it would help with recruiting, is if our best people in our shops are talking glowingly about us. Quite often, I think when we go to a Facebook message board, you see the opposite. You see people just bashing the industry, telling young people to leave the industry. And it's absolutely heartbreaking, because we want to treat our best of the best great, in hopes that they can share their story and say that, this is a great place to be. Tara, assuming you agree with me on how important it is that those best in the industry talk good about it.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to, it looked like somebody had just made a comment about, knowing what your retention is going to be like what are you going to do to keep people, and what are you already like, who are you to be able to bring them in and to keep them long term. So obviously you have to spend as much time, more time on making sure that your own people are well taken care of, and that they have that. I think somebody else had asked, do you let your current team members meet with potential team members? And I think that's a really big part of that. And knowing that, right, you wouldn't want somebody coming in and being like, yeah, I'm actually on my way out of here myself. You have to be careful with that. But if you're really opening that up and giving that opportunity, and that is something that we do, then you don't have to worry quite so much when they come in, because they already have it's part of a relationship forming, and you're able to offer that to them. And then that first day isn't so scary, and to be able to give them as much insight as you can in the very beginning about what it's really like, not what you say it's going to be like, but what it's really like. Then I think you're way faster to finding that fit and making sure that they're there for the long haul. The only other thing that we're talking about that just keeps coming into is that we're talking a lot about money. One of the biggest things that we offer is that, family always comes first. So yeah, we're not necessarily going to get somebody that's maybe single and doesn't care and is really just trying to, knock out a ton of money or whatever. Yeah, we might not be the best place. But there's different kind of paychecks too.
Such a great point. And I think being able to focus on retention, we have to focus on retention before we worry about recruiting, to be honest with you, because if we're not focused on keeping our own happy, it's going to be really darn hard to go out and bring somebody else in. And if that leads to maybe a more negative culture, I think the challenge is it's so much more of an uphill battle when your internal team isn't happy. And I think most people can sense that, right, Sarah? I mean, if you're going into a business that you're new to, you can probably see things that the folks that have worked there forever are a little blind to.
That's so true. And that's one of the things that we also really promote during the process of interview. And I discuss during phone screens, and I send them our culture, we call it our strategy to win, we talk consistently with the current employees that we have, and what the vision for the company is. It's always kind of right there when we meet or talk. It's a general focus of how are we going to help the guest, and how can we help our employees be either satisfied or just improving themselves in one way, shape, or another. So that's kind of something that we try to really make sure that is out there, and ongoing improvement, as well as, to retain people, and making sure that they're feeling that they're successful in their career, and they have some advancement, and they're not getting stagnant. So that piece is something that we really look as far as retention goes, and then making sure that those people are taken care of so they do speak well about you. Because that's one of the only things you don't want a new employee to come into the shop and everybody's just in a totally, I mean, things happen sometimes, and somebody may have had just something go wrong and they're particularly frustrated for that day or something, but you want the general morale and census of the shop or whatever department that they're in to be inviting.
Sometimes that can be a challenge with technicians, right? And I hate to pick on technicians there, but a lot of times it's not the warmest and fuzziest place in the world to step into, and I think that's the importance of also having that one or two people in the shop that, even if they're not your best technician, but they liven up the work environment and they make it fun. There's so much value in that you can't see on paper that helps drive the culture. And to me, that's what helps us kind of get some of that next generation in. When you have that welcoming person in the shop that can really be that mentor, or even if it's not a formal mentorship, it's at least being able to have fun and hear people laugh. And there's such a difference in shop culture. And I feel for techs, because a lot of times they don't know until they get in the shop. I know I had worked in a shop at one point that there was a technician that didn't allow the other technicians to turn on the radio. And it was the most awkward, quiet shop that just, you could feel the tension when you walk in the door. And I remember the first time walking into that shop and being like, my goodness, this is terrifying. So the more we can loosen it up a little bit, and every shop's going to have its own personality and its own culture. And I think it's just important to keep an eye on that, because it is so important to keeping your own people happy. We'll have another roundtable strictly on retention. We've done it in the past, and I think that's a topic we just need to keep talking about and keep it front of mind, because it's something we've all got to work on. Once we get through the application process, and you know what, we've got this person, they love us, they want to come in and work for us. Sarah, I'm going to start with you on this one. The onboarding process is pretty important. And I think getting them in our doors and doing it in a way that there's structure, they know what they're doing, they don't feel like the awkward person. We talked about how awkward that first day is in the first place. But when you get in there and there's no structure and you are just hanging out and waiting for the service manager to give you your direction, it creates this very weird vibe. And I'm curious as to if you've got any advice for that onboarding process to make that less awkward.
Generally, our best practice is we're bringing people in to onboard on an orientation day, but it doesn't always happen that way, because we have an orientation once a month or twice a month. And it's not like I can say, well, we've hired you, but 3 weeks from now, we're going to have orientation, this day and time. That just isn't the best practice. So making sure that I am prepared for that person to come in. They've got their IT stuff taken care of, their logins, all of those things. It's just, or if there's someone that's at a desk, depending upon what, position they're in, just making sure that they're feeling welcome and not put off. That is probably one of the biggest things in something that we've kind of focused in on this particular year, was one of our goals of making sure that we're prepared, we're ready, and our training process and all of those things are consistent across the board for certain positions, so that they don't feel, like you said, waiting on that service manager to give them their spot. We also let technicians come in, of course. Let's say they're starting on a Tuesday, that Monday, they can drop their toolbox off. We make sure that their bay is clear, whatever, the case may be, and make sure that we're prepared and they know that they are invited and wanted to be a part of our team, versus feeling like they're the last minute resort and we haven't taken the time to prepare for them. So that's a big focus of mine as well, is making sure that the company is prepared for their arrival.
Invited and wanted is such a key point. And even in that process, being able to have a point person that when they get there, you send somebody out to welcome them to the team and, hey, this is where you go, this is where you park at. From that point on, those first impressions are so important. And I think you hit it spot on. The more you can kind of make them feel welcome that first day, and even before that, is such a huge opportunity. Stephanie, anything that you would add to the onboarding piece?
Just something that I personally do here whenever I get a new hire, and before we even crack open the orientation packet, I take them around the entire building and personally introduce them to every single person that works here. We have probably about 60 employees that work at this facility, and whoever we walk into or whoever's they're sitting in their office or out in the shop, I introduce them. We even walk around outside, and I try to grab a few people, introduce them, tell them what they do, and what this new person is going to be doing. It's nice because they can be like, oh yeah, okay, you're a shop guy or somebody in the office. It's nice to know who's the accounting manager, who's the person you want to go to for here. So they have a familiar face. They have an idea of, oh, I need new clothes. I remember she said to go talk to this person. It makes them feel a bit more welcome versus walking through the building and feeling like a deer in headlights, like I have no idea where I'm going or who I need to ask who. It kind of also helps eliminate so many questions for me that they don't come to me like, hey, who do I ask? They already know who to go to, and they get a little more comfortable going to that person. So that's kind of how I like to do my orientation, just to kind of start out and get them comfortable.
Love it. Tara, anything you'd add to the two of them?
Just beyond that, I think just actually going through, not just handing them, a handbook or, anything like that, but actually going it through with them and explaining certain things and really just setting that foundation. I found that the majority of the issues that we've had in the past came from either skipping that process or not doing a very good job of it. So just being very intentional about what they can expect, just all the details, where they can park, when do they get paid, try to go through all those, but also give them chances to ask those questions during that time and help them feel comfortable knowing it's okay to ask whatever they need to or want to. So that has become a really big part. And then we just recently started taking people to lunch. I actually take them to lunch their first day and get to know them and maybe a little bit more about what their goals are just as a human being and how we can help them achieve those.
That is a great point. I think that first day lunch, and if you can incorporate others on the team in that lunch, I think that is really helpful. It's a pretty small investment to make sure that person gets started on the right leg, right? Like it is a really big piece. We've touched on so much today, and I say this every month, but our hour goes incredibly fast. But we do have some questions for the panelists. And I'll ask them, and then we can kind of go from there. When a tech comes in to interview, do you let them talk to some of your existing techs? We already kind of touched on that, but is that a general best practice for everybody? Perfect. Yes. So everybody, let them talk to your techs. And if you're not confident in what that outcome is going to be when they do talk to your techs, make sure you're having conversations with those techs up front. You really, really want to know the pulse of the shop before you send somebody in there and really kind of set yourself up for failure. How important are development opportunities to the interview and hiring process? I think most good techs look at that really, really hard. They want, and especially with technology evolving quicker than it ever has, pretty important, isn't it? Tara, you're shaking your head. Those development opportunities are there.
Yes, for sure. I think obviously that training is really important, knowing how the training is done and who pays for it and when it happens, if it's during business or after business hours. And then that kind of goes into what we had talked to when we met the first time, and that's just that career pathway, that's just that charting that out to see what that looks like for them in the future to grow and develop and what opportunities they have to grow in their career within your organization.
Stephanie, anything to add?
Yeah, I guess when we're in the interview process, we definitely like to stress about the training, that because we have so many different levels they can do in Bobcat training, and we remind them that we pay for the training. You get in-person trainings online, and again, we are the ones that it's all paid for, your hotel, your airfare. So we like them to know that there will be training, and it's not on their expense as well. But yeah.
Sarah?
One of our key values here at Durango Motor Company is the value of ongoing improvement. And we discuss all 7 of our core values during the process in one way, shape, or form, sometimes more in depth. But that's one that we really do hit on as far as making sure that they have the tools and the information that they need to do their job. So that's something that we really focus on at some, at one point within, whether it be, it kind of depends on where it comes up, depending upon your applicant, whether it be in the phone conversation or their in-person interview, but it's something that I always try to make sure that they have a great understanding that our ongoing improvement piece and being able to develop themselves in their career is something that's important to us as well. And that, we're going to be making sure that those are paid for. I'm actually fixing to do that. That's a task today, is to book a flight and hotel for a technician that needs to go to class. So,
which is more work than it seems, by the way. I've done
is,
that,
it is.
and it is a lot of work. And I think you hit on something that another take home for the folks that are out there. You tied it into your core values, the continual improvement. If you can tie that into your mission statement or into your core values, probably more so your core values, I think that really resonates with people. I think companies have done such a better job over the years of not just hanging that core values plaque on the wall, but actually living those values and hiring and firing based off of those values. So I love that point. Last question. Are you all building, or do you have apprenticeship or early hire programs for mechanics? How did you develop those? Sarah, you and I literally just had a conversation on this a few days ago.
We sure did. We are lucky, based off of our conversation. Those are some goals, reaching into the high schools and things that even don't have programs, but we're lucky we do have a technical school close to us, like a junior college type tech school that we do partner with for Toyota. We have actually also helped build their Ford apprentice program. And then we also really take into consideration the employees that we have start out in our express lane, and we promote them a lot. It seems like I'm always, or it feels like I'm hiring for express often, but it's not necessarily because those technicians are leaving. We're promoting them to the main shop.
That is great. When you have stories to tell about people that have been promoted within your company, those are huge. And I would highly recommend that you use those stories. We talk about it all the time on the WrenchWay pages. If you have that shop talk section, that's an excellent area to get some testimonials from your own team that have actually lived it. I think that's what you do to build trust. Stephanie, anything there?
We don't necessarily have any type of internship program here. We do, however, work with CDPC, the school just down the road from us. I go to all their career fairs, and we talk to we've gone into their classrooms and talked about us as a whole and our technicians and what we have to offer. So we have that kind of stuff. But yeah, we definitely, whenever I'm opening up a position, if it's because we move somebody from a technician to a foreman and I'm replacing them, I always like to tell them this is not a position that we're hiring for because they left, but because we promoted them. And I always like to talk about our turnover rates are pretty low and try to emphasize that kind of stuff. But I wish we had a program that would be more of an internship, because I get asked all the time, but our need is so strong for a full-time person that we don't have the ability to do an internship, but I'm hoping someday soon.
That's the importance of really building that structure and having consistency, because if you're always looking for that experienced tech, it's really hard. It's going to get harder if we have systems in place to be able to create that pipeline. I think it starts at the school level, but it takes taking a step back and looking at it through a long-term lens and actually being able to put together a program, because it's just, it's tough. And I don't know that it's going to get all that much easier. Tara, I'll finish with you here.
Ours is definitely growing and developing. It isn't perfect. Obviously, I try to gather as much information as we can where we can. And I think it would be a great opportunity for WrenchWay to help people understand kind of best practices for apprenticeship too.
It sounds like another good roundtable. We're filling out the roundtables for the rest of the year here today. So I think we'll end there. We're at the top of the hour. and past our time. So I just want to say thank you to all of the attendees today. The comment section, per usual, was amazing. And then to our three amazing panelists, it is such a pleasure to know the three of you and just love what you're doing out there and truly appreciate you joining us here today.
Thank you
Thanks
for having me,
me,
Jay.
Sue.